Welcome to Mind My Age, presented by Total Life. I'm your host, Neelam Brar, and today we have an extraordinary guest, Dr. Andrew E. Budson. Dr. Budson is a renowned neurologist, researcher, and author with expertise in memory disorders, Alzheimer's research, and dementia. He has significantly contributed to our understanding of these conditions through his positions at the Veteran Affairs Boston Healthcare System and Boston University, as well as his acclaimed books, Why We Forget and How to Remember Better, 7 Steps to Managing Your Aging Memory, 6 Steps to Managing Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia. Welcome, Dr. Budson.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Dr. Budson, at Mind My Age, we believe that your mind controls your thoughts, actions, and feelings. Dr. Budson, you've exemplified this belief throughout your incredible journey. Let's start with a question we ask all of our guests. So, what age do you feel you are living today in your mind, and why?
Well, if you had asked me that question about 6 months ago, I would have said, although I'm actually 57, I really feel about 37. And then I actually had a skiing accident in January. Somebody ran into me on the ski slopes, flattened me out, bruised my ribs, bruised the front and back of my shoulder, and actually I ended up with a detached retina of my right eye that needed to be surgically fit. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was age 57. But as I've been recovering, I'm now starting to feel younger. Now I feel about age 47. So that's about where I am today.
Yeah, it's interesting. As soon as you have a major challenge, it can really be a blow and a setback. But again, it's that resilience to define how to get back to what your comfort level is. And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I felt psychologically it was, I think, probably a good growth experience for me. I think it helped me to, be on the other side of the healthcare system in sort of a major way. I think I developed a bit more empathy for what my patients are going through at all the different pieces, whether it's waiting to get imaging studies, waiting to hear back from the doctor, trying to get into the doctor's office in a timely manner, all those things. So I think it was a good growth experience for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to coordinate, especially with the health system. Dr. Budson, you've had such a fantastic background and you've done so much research on memory and consciousness. What have been some notable surprises or pieces of information that you've uncovered that you incorporate into your day-to-day?
In terms of the things that I incorporate from the research into the day-to-day has to do with my current understanding of consciousness. So I have a theory that I think there's quite a lot of evidence for, that our consciousness wasn't sort of out there first evolutionarily, and then we'd sort of develop these memory systems to remember our conscious thoughts and actions and perceptions. The way that I understand it is that we needed a way to remember information in both a detailed way, but also a flexible way so that we could imagine different future scenarios and figure out which future scenario we are interested in helping to come about. Which actions do we want to take to have the future that we envision occur? And for this reason, consciousness developed. And so I actually think about our consciousness as actually part of memory, and such that our conscious perceptions, decisions, and actions are actually memories of unconscious sensations, decisions, and actions. And so the way that this influences my day-to-day life is I have a much better understanding of the fact that, when I do something like eat that second piece of chocolate cake, even though it's something I shouldn't do, and we'll talk about later in terms of what are the healthy habits to have in terms of eating, I actually now realize it's my unconscious drives that are controlling the situation. And I need to work a little bit harder to use my conscious abilities to, sort of tell my unconscious self, let's hold off on that second piece of chocolate cake. One is just enough. So that's one way in which some of my research actually influences my day-to-day life.
Great example. When I think about my aging parents, there are so many unconscious or subconscious memories that they've accumulated throughout their entire journey that they're not aware of. And so, how do you inform people about this opportunity to first recognize those and then influence how they're handled in your day to day?
Yeah. So, I think that it, I try to tell everybody, you know, what they need to know in order to help them, sort of make a positive change in their life. And I think, as people are getting older, it tends to be the automatic activities that are the easiest to do, and the ones that require changes and sort of conscious thoughts, deliberations, decisions can become a little bit more difficult. And I think this is one of the reasons that even healthy older adults have a little bit more trouble, for example, using new technology that comes out, because it does take more memory, more sort of, conscious cognitive, thinking abilities to sort of figure out the new technology and see how that gets incorporated into one's life. Whereas using the old technology, the things they had learned previously, that is been taken over by some of these unconscious processes, and so that's a little bit easier.
In each of your books, you delve into topics around memory and consciousness. If you were to talk to an aging senior today, or talk to our audience of listeners today, what are some of the key takeaways for each book that you could share with us that could help us improve?
Absolutely. So let's start with the 6 steps to managing Alzheimer's disease and dementia book. This book is written for families of individuals whose loved ones are really in the middle of this dementia situation, this dementia disease. And so it helps people, number one, the step one is understand dementia, understand what they're dealing with, understanding, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, whereas the term dementia is a general term that can apply to many different diseases, where Alzheimer's is a specific disorder and there's other specific disorders as well. We talk about step 2, which is how to manage all the different problems that come up, whether it's somebody having difficulty that they're trying to leave their home and they're wandering, or maybe they're having hallucinations, or there's trouble with understanding, or there's trouble, sort of shadowing the person around, or they're having trouble with incontinence. How do you manage all those problems? Then step 3, we talk about medications, and how do you know which medications might be helpful? And on the other hand, which medications may actually be causing some of the problems. In step 4, we talk about how does the family member, the caregiver, sort of work to build their care team, and how do they take care of themselves, because that is vitally important. In step 5, we talk about how do you sustain your relationship with your loved one when all these changes are going on and your loved one can't do the things that they used to be able to do with you. And then finally, in step 6, we talk about how do you plan the future, how do you go forward, and what are things that will come up at the end of the person's life. And many of these topics are a little bit frightening, but I worked with my co-author to, approach these topics in a sort of a caring, compassionate, hopefully not frightening way. And we built some stories into the book to make it a little bit easier, like you're reading it sort of along with a friend. So that's the 6 steps book. Now, the 7 steps to managing your aging memory book, that's written for individuals who are getting a little bit older and have noticed some changes in their memory. And they're trying to figure out, like, are these changes normal? Are these changes not normal? And what should be done about it? And so, for example, in the first 2 steps, we talk about learning what normal memory is, and then learning what are the changes that occur in normal aging. And I'll mention briefly that in normal aging, we expect that information might need to be repeated a couple of times in order for the individual to get a hold of it and remember it. When they're retrieving information, it might take a little bit longer for them to come up with the name or the place or the restaurant that they're trying to think of. And lastly, in normal aging, they might need a hint or a cue in order to find the information that they're looking for. But importantly, in normal aging, as long as it got into the memory stores, it should be able to be retrieved. Now, we contrast that in the next step with Alzheimer's, in that in Alzheimer's, even when information is repeated, even if you wait a bit of time or give a hint or a cue, that information is often lost and it cannot be retrieved. And we call that rapid forgetting. And when that happens, that's not normal, and that should always be evaluated.
So would it be fair to say that the key difference between normal aging memory loss and Alzheimer's and dementia is, like, in normal aging memory loss, you might take longer, you might struggle to find the answer, but ultimately that answer is still in your memory, whereas with Alzheimer's and dementia, that answer, that memory is just gone.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And so does one lead to the other? Could early memory loss that's related to aging be a precursor or a signal for Alzheimer's and dementia? And how do you delineate between the two for the audience listening that's probably thinking, oh man, I always forget where I put my keys and I don't remember where that was. And that's a common issue at every age, but then things compound as we get older.
Absolutely. So let me first just comment on the last thing that you said, which is that if someone has always had trouble remembering where they put their keys or glasses or cell phone or wallet, and now they're getting a little older and they're still doing these same things that they've done all their life, I am not worried about that, and I don't think the person should be worried about that either. But on the other hand, some people are actually quite good at remembering where they put everything, and they don't have to hunt around looking for things. If those individuals are suddenly finding that they are losing their keys, glasses, wallet, pocketbook, and this is like a new thing that did not used to happen, then I would be concerned. So when there's a change in the memory, that's really different from the way it used to be, that's one sign that it's probably worth seeing your doctor and just trying to understand, why has my memory changed? To answer your question, we do think normal aging is different from the trajectory that one gets with Alzheimer's and other disorders of memory. But we now know that people know themselves pretty well. And if someone feels that there's a change in their memory, whether it's like, losing things in the example I gave, or they're getting lost even on familiar routes that never used to happen to them before, when people are noticing a change in themselves, people are pretty good And one study showed that over a period of 7 years, now that's 7 years is a long time, but over a period of 7 years, people who felt like there was something wrong with their memory and were concerned enough about it to go and see their doctor, within 7 years, those people did have a diagnosable disorder, even if there wasn't anything to be diagnosed at the first point in time. So, the bottom line is I hope that, some of these little tips that we've talked about right here will help to reassure some people, and other people might think, oh, geez, maybe I should go see my doctor. And, if they're not sure, that's why I wrote like a whole book on trying to help people sort out like what's normal and what's not.
Well, and let's come to that. Why we forget and how to remember better. I would love to kind of understand what some of the actionable insights are on how to remember better, because I think that impacts people at all ages, as well as those that are starting to see an acceleration of memory decline.
Absolutely. So in that book, we actually take people through understanding the different types of memory. So we actually have one memory system that helps us with procedures and skills and habits. People often call this like muscle memory, or skill learning. And this is a way that we can remember how to ride a bike, how to touch type, how to swing a golf club, all those things is one memory system. And some of the tips of how to improve that one are practice, 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 and to make sure you get a good night's sleep, because it turns out that sleep is critically important and people actually can improve while they're sleeping. Then another type of memory is our ability to keep information in our minds and manipulate it. We call that working memory, because it's the memory that's involved with working on what's in your mind. And a good way to do better with that is to make sure that you're paying attention to whatever it is you're trying to store in your memory. Then we have the typical memory, which is memory for events or episodes of our lives. And that is a memory that we really want to focus on whatever part of the event that we want to remember. So if you're, for example, going to a jazz brunch, at a restaurant, they have a band playing and there's also delicious food. If you're there because you're scoping out the band, then you need to focus your attention on the band. If you're there because you're interested in trying out the food, then you want to pay attention to the food. And if you're there to just have a nice time with friends and family, then you want to probably ignore those things and make sure you're focusing on your friends and your loved ones. So those are some tips there. And then the last type of memory that we talk about is memory for facts and figures. And this includes like learning a new language or learning, any type of information that you might want to learn, whether it's in school or for your job or anything at all. And there, it's important to not only work on learning the information, but also to learn it in different contexts so that whenever you need to pull that information out, you'll be able to pull it out quickly and easily. So those are an example of some of the things that we talk about in those books and some of the specific tips that we give for different types of memory that come naturally once you understand how these different memory systems work.
Reflection has a large part in sustaining memory as well. What are some tools around reflection that can support memory and long-term memory?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we reflect on an experience, we're able to do several very important things. So one of the things that reflection does is it helps us to organize the information or the experience that we've had. So reflection is equally important if we've just finished, say, studying for an exam for a couple hours, or we're preparing for a presentation, or we've just had a wonderful evening with loved ones. Reflection helps us to organize that information, and that will help us remember it. Just simply reviewing that information will also help us to remember it better. And one of the things that we've learned is that if you space out your learning, if you repeat information and you space it out over time, that helps the learning be extremely long lasting. You can remember things for a lifetime if you, for example, you have a nice day, let's say doing an event with your family in the afternoon, then you reflect on it before you go to bed. Let's say you think about it again the following week, and maybe a month after that, you'll likely remember that for the rest of your life. So reflection really can be a wonderful tool for memory.
It's also a great tool for fulfillment, right? To take a moment to smell the flowers, as they say, right? To really think about all of the great things that happen in the day before you go to bed, or reflect on all the great things that happened during the week before Monday starts again.
Absolutely. I think, having a moment of gratitude for the things in your life is truly important.
Can you provide a practical example of how a memory aid or habit has proven particularly effective in your life?
Sure, sure. So I'm actually a huge believer in using habit. And so I work hard to train myself, for example, to always do my morning, routine in the same order, my bedtime routine in the same order. I take, some vitamins and minerals before I go to bed. Always take them in the same order. Then I floss my teeth, then I brush my teeth. I do all these things in the same order, and that way I know I won't forget any of them. Do that the same when I put my briefcase together in the morning. Make sure I have my cell phone in one pocket, my laptop in another pocket, my earbuds, in another place. Make sure I have everything in place. I would say, using routines and habits, again, letting your unconscious do the work for you. That's what happens when you turn it into a routine or a habit. It makes life easier. Once you do things in using habits, then your conscious mind is free to think about other things. So as your automatic self is getting everything together in the morning, you can think about what meetings you're going to have during the day. You can reflect on something that happened yesterday, particularly if it's upsetting you or something like that. Those are all good habits to have.
Several technology founders are always thinking about how to optimize or biohack their day to day, as well as their physical health. And one of the things that's really stayed with me in some of these tips is, you want to reduce decisions in the mornings that are not critical or that could be just turned into a routine, so that you you can make room for those more strategic decisions. And that's why you had folks like Steve Jobs, wearing the black turtleneck every day. He didn't want to take a decision uh, point towards his clothing, because that was not a useful or productive decision that he wanted to spend time on. When we think about our aging seniors and folks that are, starting to see their memory become weaker, um, what are some of those decisions that you think people should really try to move into routine um, and turn into a very predictable path?
People really need to think about, what are the things that are important to them. And it's really going to be different for different people. Sometimes people are thinking about, that it's, spending time with loved ones. That's what's really most important. And so if that's the case, don't worry about, you know, fancy vacations or what you're going to have for lunch or whatever. Spend more time thinking about your loved ones. For people who are like, they want to, work on, writing their memoirs and things like that, then, they would want to focus, more energy on those things. One thing I'll mention that many seniors do that I think can have detriments is many people have more than one house. And at least in the New England area, many people travel south for the winter. And it can be difficult because then you have essentially two of everything that you have to keep track of. You got to, make sure your internet's working in both places, your television's working in both places, keeping everything clean in both places. There's going to be different routines, different supermarkets. So sometimes that can be a little bit challenging. And if somebody is beginning to have a little bit of memory trouble, I would recommend that they probably stay put in one place. That could be very helpful and relieve so much burden that happens at the change of location.
So actually reducing the number of things one has to keep track of is healthy for the mind, which is interesting because I would have thought, people say keep your mind active, keep learning new things, keep challenging yourself. So it's kind of contrary to that belief.
Well, it depends. It depends if the person is starting to have challenges or not. So I think what you said is entirely correct for the person who's not having any challenges. It depends if they're sort of where they are and if they're starting to have difficulties or not. But I didn't mean to say that one should simplify things if they are sort of healthy. You were asking me like what are ways to simplify your life, and so that was one of the ways to simplify your life.
That makes a lot of sense. And you've done a lot of research in the Alzheimer's and dementia space. What are some of the latest research findings in Alzheimer's disease and dementia that you can share with us?
Absolutely. So one of the most exciting things in the field of Alzheimer's disease is that we now have two good FDA-approved medications. And one of them is called lecanemab, whose brand name is Leqembi. The other one is called donanemab, whose brand name is Kisunla. And these medications can actually remove the Alzheimer's plaques from the brain. And this is just a super exciting finding. Now, it can't actually cure Alzheimer's, and it cannot reverse the memory loss, but it can slow it down. And so what this means is that people used to be in the very earliest, the very mildest stages of Alzheimer's disease for, say, approximately 1 to 3 years. And with these medications, we're now going to be able to double that or maybe even triple it. So people will be in it instead of 1 to 3 years for 2 to 6 years, maybe for 3 to 9 years. And it's really going to add just so much quality of life, so much independence of function to people. They really are game changers. Now, I'll just briefly mention that the downsides of these medications are it's a bit of a pain taking them. You have to go into either a clinic or the hospital either every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks to get an intravenous infusion. And there can be side effects of brain swelling or brain bleeding. So it's not a medication that's for everyone. It's not a medication everybody is able to take. But it really is the beginning of just a new world in terms of the treatment of Alzheimer's disease.
And in parallel to the medications that are starting to come online in the market, what about experimental psychology or cognitive neuroscience? How have those fields contributed to these advancements on managing and prolonging the disease?
Thank you so much for asking me that, because one of the consequences of these new medications, like I said, is there's going to be many more people who are living longer with this very mild stage of memory loss. And we, as sort of scientists and physicians, we need to do something to help them out, to help them stay independent. And there's actually two research studies that I'm integrally involved with that is trying to address that issue. And the first of them is using something called transcranial alternating current stimulation. And what that actually does is it gives a very small amount of electricity to the scalp. And that can actually help to facilitate the functioning of the brain. And we can help people to actually remember things better, to increase their learning of information with this little bit of transcranial electrical activity. And then there's another project that we're doing that's helping what's called the consolidation of the memories, taking the memories from a short-term temporary store and put it into a long-term, more permanent store. And this we're doing by using neurofeedback. We're actually putting a little strip of electrodes on the scalp and showing people their EEG in real time. And we're having like a dial. And if they're working and they can get the dial pointing in one direction, which means they've increased the theta rhythms in their brain, they will actually be able to remember that information better, not just for a day, but for weeks, months, and years later. So we're working on some of these different techniques to help actually both healthy older adults, but also older adults that are beginning to have memory problems.
That's fascinating. It's so reassuring to hear that there are advancements happening, and with AI and the new technologies available, hopefully these advancements are accelerated and new discoveries are happening over the next 12 months that make it easier for folks with this diagnosis. What are some additional promising therapies that you've seen on the horizon that listeners should be aware of or should be tracking research studies on?
Sure. So actually, one of the other things that my colleague, Dr. Kate Turk, is working on that I actually think is very important and actually also fits in with the consciousness work that we've spoken about is using mindfulness meditation. So I've mentioned several times that it's important to be able to pay attention, to focus your attention. But of course, sometimes it's difficult to be able to focus one's attention. And by practicing mindfulness, focusing on your breath or focusing on your body or specific sounds in the environment, whatever it is in terms of your practice, this can actually help you to practice paying attention. And we can get better at paying attention, just like we can get better at all sorts of different types of skills. And so I think that, one way that people can really help to improve their memories is to improve their ability to focus and pay attention by practicing that skill using mindfulness. So I think that is one very promising technique.
Absolutely. At Total Life, we offer therapy to seniors that want weekly or daily support in building those new habits that can help improve mindfulness, memory, and overall wellness. And it's so interesting, the studies that are coming around on the benefits of mindfulness, meditation, yoga. Being Indian myself, I grew up with this in my household, and it's fascinating to see how much science now backs these cultural traditions.
Totally, science has taken a little while to catch up, but we're getting there.
Doctor, your research on the biological basis of consciousness is fascinating. How does this connect to memory disorders?
Well, as I was mentioning, sort of the way that I view consciousness is that it's actually part of the memory system. And so the way it then connects to memory disorders is that when I'm seeing an individual with a disorder of thinking and memory, the way I now conceptualize it is I'm really looking at an individual who's showing a disorder of their consciousness. And the way that this is actually relevant from a clinical standpoint is it means that their automatic abilities to function using routines will actually be relatively preserved. And this is one of the reasons that if I can help my patients to continue to do things using habits and routines, that they're going to be able to function better. It's also one of the reasons that people who are developing memory disorders, like people with Alzheimer's, will have so much trouble if they go on a trip, on a vacation somewhere. That's often the first time that families notice that there's a problem. It's because when you are in a new routine, like on vacation, where everything is different, everything's in a different place, you have to use your conscious mind to be able to adjust to those difficulties. And it also relates to sort of a later stage of dementia when people are more and more confused and they spend more and more time in what's called the delirium, which is sort of when they're, particularly confused and can't really make sense of things. And I think that's a situation when the consciousness is mainly gone. So I do view my consciousness work helping me understand what's going on with my patients, and also through habits and routines and other unconscious processes to help them function better for longer.
But this phenomenon of false memories, the implications are massive. So, how do you help patients manage those false memories, identify them, manage them, and what are some practical ways? I have a friend right now that is managing her mother's Alzheimer's, and she definitely talks about this often. And so, what are some practical ways for the listeners to manage these situations in their everyday life?
So false memories or memory distortions, thinking that things that never happened have happened, or maybe thinking that things happened in a different, distorted way from the way they actually happened, are actually quite common. We did a survey study that showed that false memories were almost as common as forgetting, and that both false memories as well as forgetting impact the function in an individual's day-to-day life. And I have spent many years, as you mentioned, trying to understand false memories and understand how common they are and their impact, because it's something that families tell me like every day. They tell me about all sorts of false memories that go on, but most of the clinical scientific literature doesn't really pay attention to them, even though they're a major problem. So when they occur, let's say we're talking about a person who's Alzheimer's or other dementia is sort of in the moderate stage. I recommend probably using a technique that I call the 4 Rs. So the first thing that happens, particularly if, let's say, the person with dementia is sort of frightened by whatever false memory they're happening. Maybe it's a memory of a traumatic event that never really happened. So we want to use the 4 Rs. So the first R is to reassure them that everything is okay. Second R is to reconsider things from the individual's perspective, that although it might be something that sounds ridiculous to us, it can be very real to them. The third thing to help them out is to redirect them just away from whatever it is that's upsetting them and toward things that are both calming and distracting. And the fourth R is for all of us caregivers to take in a deep breath and relax. Because if we are upset or frustrated or irritated because this is the 15th time in an hour that they've had a false memory or something like that, we want to make sure that we don't sort of reflect our own irritation to the individual, to our loved one, because otherwise we can just sort of escalate the situation. If it's a situation where the person is, much more mild, you can do the obvious things. You can say, well, Mom, it's really unlikely that, I was away for the last year. I really was here yesterday. And, the way I can show you is that, look, I put this food in your refrigerator, or something like that. So there's nothing wrong with using a little bit of logic. But if your loved one is starting to argue back with you, use the 4Rs, just change the topic, go on to something else. It's often not worth fighting them.
Oh, that's a really great resource, the 4Rs. Doctor, at Total Life, we aim to provide mental health services tailored to seniors. How does maintaining cognitive health fit into the work you've done and the research you've done?
Yeah, well, it's, maintaining your cognitive health, keeping your memory strong. These are important things, for my patients. I think they're important things really for everyone of any age. And as people get older, we want to not only keep their bodies going strong, we want to keep their minds going strong too. So for me, it goes part and parcel with everything else that we do.
So, what are some exercises? You often hear about folks saying people should do crossword puzzles. What are some suggestions you have for our listeners?
The first thing I want to say is there are some things that have been studied and have not been effective. And computerized brain training games have not been effective. So I don't recommend that people spend their time doing that unless they enjoy them. There's no harm in doing something like that if you enjoy it.
So, you mean like playing Candy Crush obsessively? Not effective?
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. There have been things that have been studied that are effective, and this includes crossword puzzles. It includes doing new or novel activities. It includes spending time socializing with friends and families as well as new people, and doing aerobic exercises. There's probably few things that are as good as doing aerobic exercise. And so if you put these things together and maybe you tie in some music, which has also been shown to be beneficial, there's probably nothing better than going out dancing. That's probably like the number one thing that one can do. It has all these different components together.
I think that's such a wonderful insight. So many cultures incorporate dance into their gatherings, and it is such a valuable opportunity for
Right, and it's
connection.
something people can do at any age. And let's say one has a little physical impairment and they can't really get out there and boogie the way they used to. Still being at the social event, being able to sway to the music and move to the music and have somebody hold your hands and move you around, even if your body's not swinging like it used to, it's wonderful and very beneficial for your thinking and memory in your brain.
Doctor, how can accessing mental health care through modalities like online therapy, as offered by Total Life, benefit seniors managing memory related issues?
Mental health problems are are huge, and we need all the available resources as possible. And in this day and age when you just can't access a mental health professional in person easily, either because there's just wait lists are 6 months or more, or because you may have mobility problems or convenience issues, I think to have an online resource like you offer is really just fantastic. And I only hope that it will grow and be available for more and more individuals across the country, and who knows, maybe across the world. It's a wonderful resource you provide.
To recap, we've discussed understanding memory issues and aging advances in Alzheimer's research, practical memory improvement tips. Dr. Budson, what is the most important takeaway you hope our listeners remember from today's conversation as it relates to managing their own memory or that of their loved ones?
So, when it comes to trying to remember things yourself, whatever you pay attention to, you will remember. And if you want to remember it for a long time, do reflect on it later that day and periodically thereafter, and you'll be able to remember it for a lifetime. And lastly, if you're concerned either about your own memory or that of your loved ones, the new medications that I talked about work so much better when they're started earlier. So if you're concerned, go see your doctor or talk to your loved one about seeing their doctor. Don't wait. You want to jump on memory problems. When they're mild, we can do a lot to help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Budson, for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights into memory and aging and cognitive health. It's been a truly enlightening conversation. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you'd like to connect with Dr. Budson, you can find him on his website at andrewbudsonmd.com and follow him on social media for more updates and resources. You can also connect with me, Neelam Brar, on LinkedIn and on our website at www.totallife.com. Listeners, if you're inspired by today's conversation, visit totallife.com to learn more and sign up for resources that can help you age well. Remember, it's never too late to start taking care of your mental health and staying engaged. Stay mindful, stay healthy, and keep thriving. Until next time, this is Neelam Brar signing off.